All right, let's get into this. And I want to start this out by saying this very clearly right out of the gate. This is not directed at any person, any channel, any dealer, any website, or any organization at all. We don't do that over here. We're not going to do that. This is strictly about educating collectors, period. And so if you're listening to this and you feel uncomfortable, or you feel like this is about you, I would encourage you to pause and ask yourself why you would think that it is about you. And if the answer makes you uneasy, maybe it's worth examining what behavior is triggering that reaction. Not an accusation, just a self-reflection. Big difference. And so now let's talk about Hot 10 lists in the comic book hobby. Because in theory, they're neutral. They're informational. They're supposed to be a snapshot of activity. They're not inherently evil or malicious. And they're not some grand conspiracy either. In fact, they serve a real purpose. Dealers use them to see what's moving so they know what to stock. Content creators talk about them because they are literally the news of the hobby for that week. That's it. And I want to put this in perspective because I want people to understand. I happen to be a sports guy. I like watching football, baseball, hockey, you name it. I watch ESPN. I watch the Pat McAfee show. I tune in to see what's going on in those outlets. That's it. They're talking about, the hot team of the week, whatever. It's the news. It's conversation. It's context. Where things would go sideways is if I took that information and I called up MGM Grand, or I got on my phone and took out the FanDuel app and I started putting money on teams that they were telling me were hot. That would be the difference. And so where things go sideways with these Hot 10 lists is how collectors, especially new collectors, interact with this information. Because listening to Pat McAfee hype up a quarterback doesn't cost me a dime. Watching SportsCenter in the morning when I'm drinking coffee and I'm hearing about whatever team is on, that doesn't hurt me. But the minute you take that information and you start playing games and spending money on these hot, trendy things, you're gambling. And gambling is where things get ugly very fast. And this exact thing happens with comics. You can watch Hot 10 lists, enjoy them. You can go, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. That book is moving this week, and you can leave it right there. That's normal. That's how seasoned collectors treat that information. But the minute you take that action, the minute you feel that urgency, that fear of missing out, that pressure to buy it before it's too late, trouble is already on the way. And the action is the danger zone. And that's where new collectors get absolutely crushed. And unfortunately for our hobby, we don't have a lot of resources that warn you about that part. Nobody sits you down and says, hey, by the way, the fastest way to lose money here is reacting to weekly trends. But that's the reality. That's the truth. Your best move as a new collector, and this is going to sound boring, but it's real, is do nothing. Buy nothing and watch. Watch the patterns. Watch what spikes and then collapses. Watch how often the same books cycle through these lists. Watch how fast attention moves on to the next shiny thing. And if you're sitting there and you're going, oh, no, I'm not a new collector. I got it. Okay, let me define that. If you've been in the hobby for less than 5 years, I'm going to call you a new collector. There's books in this hobby that you haven't seen cycle back to the market yet twice, that have sold and you have not seen them come back again yet. So this information is for you. The dirty little secret about Hot 10 lists and trendy books is that it rarely gives you the full picture. The list might say something like, this book is up 120% this week or something like that, okay? That sounds exciting, right? Feels like momentum, feels like some activity, little confirmation, if you will. But what they don't tell you is how many copies actually sold. That 120% increase could literally be one book, one sale, one outlier, one auction that got two emotional bidders going at it at the same time. If underneath that percentage, you saw a line of text that said 7 copies sold, or worse, 1 copy sold, how would that make you feel? Probably not very excited, I would imagine. Probably not very urgent to get on eBay and start buying this stuff up. And that's exactly why that information never gets published. Not because someone is lying to you, but because incomplete data is far more effective at creating excitement than complete data is. You can't properly evaluate what you're seeing because you're not the one with that information. Somebody else has it. That data exists. It's just not being shown to you. And without volume, without price movement, it's meaningless information. That's basic market reality. Low liquidity markets are volatile by nature, and comics are no different. They are thinly traded assets. It does not take much money at all to move prices, especially on modern keys or books that have no business being graded or slabbed at all. That volatility gets mistaken for demand, and then new collectors confuse activity with health. They see motion and assume value. And this is where Hot 10 lists become detrimental. Not because they exist, but because how they're interpreted and acted upon. I want to talk about the psychology of it for a second, because hot lists trigger urgency. Urgency triggers fear of missing out. Fear of missing out triggers impulsive buying, and impulsive buying leads to overpaying. You see where I'm going? Overpaying leads to regret. Regret leads to burnout. Burnout leads to people leaving the hobby entirely and never coming back. I guarantee you the hobby right now in 2026 is a lot smaller than it was 5 years ago. And it happens over and over again. You get your winners, you get your losers. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about the consequences of that. Nobody's talking about new collectors who kind of quietly disappeared. This isn't for them. They don't have enough money for that. You don't hear those stories. They don't make content. They don't put those videos out there. They just leave, embarrassed, frustrated, convinced this whole thing is rigged. It's not rigged. It's just unforgiving if you don't understand what game you're playing, what game they're playing, and your role in that. Hot 10 lists are not investment advice. They are not buy signals. They are not roadmaps to wealth. They are closer to weather reports, if you would. Interesting, useful maybe, but not something you should base major financial decisions on. And that brings us to slabs. Because we need to have an uncomfortable but honest conversation about certain books that have become sacred cows in this hobby. They're on the list every week. I'm talking about Amazing Spider-Man 300, 252, Invincible #1, Uncanny X-Men 141. I could go on. But here's the truth, and people don't like hearing it. I'm going to keep saying it anyways. They're junk slabs. It's garbage. Now, before anybody loses their minds, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with owning these books. Raw. They're iconic. They're historically important. They're fun. They're foundational to modern comic culture, and they should be enjoyed as reading copies. In a short box as part of a personal collection, fine. But as slabs, as financial instruments, as things people are paying thousands of dollars for, no. They're massively overslabbed like thousands of other books that are in the same situation. Population counts are enormous. Supply overwhelms demand the moment spec cools off. And these books don't disappear into collections forever. They constantly come back on the market over and over and over again. And when everybody owns the same must have book, nobody actually has anything special. It's not scarce. You're not early. You're just late to a very crowded party. And Hot 10 lists love these books because they're familiar. They're easy. They're recognizable. Oh, it's back on the Hot 10 again this week. You'll never believe it. They generate clicks and thumbnails. But familiarity does not equal safety. Now, if your goal is enjoyment, cool. But if your goal is long-term value preservation, you should be extremely cautious about paying premium slab prices for books that have no business being slabbed at all and an endless supply. And I happen to consider myself a hobbyist. I like raw books, but I got to tell you, given some of this that's going on, I mean, here's a thought. Maybe instead of dropping hundreds of dollars on junk slabs, what if you spent $10 a month on Marvel Unlimited or DC Infinite? I mean, you could read ASM 300 1,000 times a day for a year for the cost of getting it in a 9.8 grade. It's not even worth anything. You could actually enjoy the story instead of treating it like a scratch-off ticket. And by the way, this segment isn't sponsored by Marvel or DC, so before anybody goes there, no, that's not what this is about either. I'm trying to put this in perspective for new collectors because that's mostly who's doing it. Dropping hundreds of dollars on these things that are basically worth no value to them. That's what a lot of this has turned into, scratching tickets and hoping you hit. It's always been my observation and my experience that the hobby is at its healthiest when people slow down, when people stop reacting, when they stop confusing movement with meaning. Collectors are happier, they're buying what they want. When they understand that not every hot book is an opportunity, and not every opportunity needs to be acted on either. Hot 10 lists aren't the villain. Misuses. Watch those like you'll watch sports highlights. Learn from them, observe patterns, see how often the same books pop up, spike, fade, come back again. And remember, the most powerful move you can do as a new collector is nothing. Don't purchase, don't panic, just relax. Patience. Because with these Hot 10 lists, just like in gambling, the house doesn't need you to lose every time. It just needs you to keep playing.